Hey, sexy people. Um, Obviously, I got up. Well, it's not that I just got up, it's just that I haven't done anything since I've got up to do something about this. Checked out the hot tub, ice cold. The pool, way too cold. It is Florida cold today. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh my gosh, it's so cold compared to the rest of the country, of course, but you know how it is. You get acclimated to a place, and it is what it is. I've lived in famously warm places before. I grew up in Hawaii, and I've also lived in shockingly cold places where it would just sneak up on you, like Colorado, where it would be 72 the day before, and you would go jogging, and then you'd go out the next day, and snow was on the ground. So I adapt. I decided to film this outside, even though there's a breeze blowing and it's cold, because look behind me. It looks gorgeous. And my hair, I mean, I don't think I could tease it to look this amazing. And so before I take a shower and ruin that Dragon Ball Z like effect, I thought I would do our 8th chapter called Sweaty Nights in Reseda. Okay, this Buck's book is doing something that's really interesting to me, which is ever since the 4th chapter, which I was not the biggest fan of. It was my least favorite chapter in the book. 5, 6, 7 have all been my favorite chapters. um, and this definitely continues to the trend. If you're into the wrestling thing or wanted to understand more about promotions that you may have heard of but not gotten a scene, or you didn't really get it, like Dragon's Gate or Chikara, Japan in general, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. If you ever wanted to know about the money stuff that was going around at the time, how much were guys getting paid? How much was it to get a deal in Ring of Honor in around 2010 and that kind of thing? This is your chapter. It really gives up the goods. Sweaty Nights in Reseda by Nick. We ended the last chapter by Matt about them meeting Kenny Omega. This definitely continues that. So, Battle of Los Angeles, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. Nick is there. Kenny and he got along right away. There's a scary moment in that match, and I remember this once he talked about it, where the rope broke and Kenny Omega hit his head on the floor, but then just kept working. I knew about this because Davey Richards was involved with the match, and Davey Richards is a guy I had a hand in training. So I remember hearing about this and watching it and seeing what a big deal it was. So that was, I'm not going to say it was cool because somebody got hurt, but I will say that it was fascinating remembering all that stuff. So we're right at November 22nd, 2008. So 2008 going into 2009. So Nick checks in about relationship stuff. He's a little jealous and owns that about Matt and Dana, who had just gotten married. And then he met Ellen DeGeneres on a small independent show for Battleground Pro Wrestling in Los Alamitos, California. And that looks like it's going to be a thing because they're already talking on MySpace. So, things are getting pretty serious. And then March 2009, he gets a shot at Chikara dealing with Mike Quackenbush for a thing called King of Trios 3-person tournament. Nick goes into this thing of conventional wrestling wisdom. I mean, he doesn't really label it as such, but I do, because he was being told, "Oh, you got to get to the East Coast because that's where wrestling is. California, it's not there. Nobody's going to know you. Nobody's going to see you." But clearly with the internet and things like that, that was changing. But they talked about how they got to go to Philly, wrestle in the ECW arena, what a fucking dump it was, how they felt the pressure, how they had some merchandise, how they made shirts, but then about running into a guy named El Generico, Ramey. And I'll tell you, I have my own stories, which I'll save for my Patreon, about El Generico. and my encounter with him, and it really holds up to what the Bucks are saying here, particularly Nick, that he was just a guy who's really smart about dealing with things, and he basically took them out, took them out to dinner, and introduced them to the Philly cheesesteak, and then talked to Trevor and the Bucks about how to make money. He's like, I'm making around $25,000 for the year in wrestling, and the chunk of that is from my merch. And so they were sitting there going, holy shit. And Matt was really honest. We were lucky if we made $5,000 a year for a year's work. It also gave him hope, but it reminded him that they had to step up their merch game. And it still seemed like a faraway fantasy, but now they had some hard numbers to back it up. So King of Trios wrestled a Japanese team. By the third night, it felt like they really made it. Then they went on a Dragon's Gate tour in Japan, and Ellen dealt with this much better than Nick's old girlfriend did. And then, while they were in Japan, they got an email from Adam Pearce, a guy that I'm very familiar with, who I booked multiple times when he was NWA champion and Ring of Honor booker, and then when he transitioned out of being Ring of Honor booker. We would bring him in for our big annual show called Sacred Ground for Platinum Championship Wrestling. Always respected Adam. I always think it's great. And often I really, especially in the last couple of years, we honored him with our yearly award thing. And honestly, at one point I was booking Adam, one, because he was great at working with the guys and teaching them, but really I was booking Adam for me, because I considered him a peer, though he was much more successful at that aspect of the game than I was as far as getting paid and that kind of thing. Anyway, so I thought it was interesting here that they put the money down, and so they would fly them in for the Ring of Honor stuff. That was the deal, and they would get $100 a match. So it was cool to see the sort of economics of that time. It's weird to think that my going rate was $150 when I wrestled in the late 90s, early 2000s. Just different times, different things. Keep in mind that wrestling hadn't quite, I don't know. Anyway, so when they got back home, they got an email that's saying they're going to start Dragon's Gate USA with Gabe Sapolsky, because Adam Pearce had just replaced Gabe Sapolsky as booker at Ring of Honor. It's interesting to note all of this in time. This is just, I was starting to get PCW going, or at least, had a ring and were training guys again. So I had my old guys back, and I was beginning to train some new guys. Because late 2009 is when PCW really got going again. It's fascinating to see all of this in time. So it's only $75 per match, but they're flying in, but they're happy to get a new promotion. And then they're back at PWG for a tag tournament. They put over, one of the teams is Kenny Omega and Chuck Taylor. And I really have not gotten the Chuck Taylor thing. So I was glad to see Nick sort of explain about him, right? He looks like a normal dude, but had a hell of a skill set. All right, that I already kind of knew. And then he goes, he was deceptively strong and had a sharp mind for creating great matches. Now I get the Chuck Taylor thing a little more, definitely. But the Bucks ran into a problem, right? They beat Kenny and Chuck in a second round match, but they're booed out of the building. And then when they were going to wrestle Bryan Danielson and Roderick Strong in the final, Roderick Strong and Bryan Danielson's solution was, well, we'll beat the shit out of you so you'll get sympathy, but it didn't work. And then the Bucks started fighting back, and it ended up being this really, really brutal match. I remember seeing this thing as people telling me, oh yeah, these fucking asshole Bucks get theirs. And I remember watching the thing and going no, I think this is an attempt for Danielson and Roderick Strong to try to get them over as babyfaces, but it's just not working because of the way that crowd is. But this definitely planted seeds in the mind of the Bucks, and I love that they're taking on this journey in their mind and what's going on in this sort of chronological order which they're describing things. So they go back to the ECW arena. This time they make their debut for Ring of Honor, and Kerry Silkin loved the match. match. Kerry Silkin sort of instrumental in keeping Ring of Honor going and being part of all their major shit that they've done. And I think the story of like, you guys are good, we'll eventually start flying you into these shows and paying you, and then Adam Pearce goes, we're already doing that, basically. Hilarious. And for perspective for the young wrestlers who may want to complain about conditions now, listen to this. That night we crammed into a cheap hotel room with 8 other wrestlers. This was the norm, by the way, back from when I wrestled, and shared the floor with Matt. I understand that we were paying our dues, so I refused to ever complain. There was pay, yes, but I imagine things would be a tad more glamorous. Amen, brother. They talk about deciding to not run high-risk wrestling shows, which was their promotion, anymore because their career was taking off. Again, smart move. Obviously, their dates are filling up. And then there's an in-demand pay-per-view for Dragon Gate USA. So they knew, and they're wrestling Sema, who's the guy that sold out their merch for them in Japan on their first tour, and Susumu Yokozuka. And they knew it was their star maker, and Gabe booked them to go over in a bit of a shock, the Bucks to go over in a shock. And then Matt cut this promo how long they were no longer the tag team of the future, and then Mike Johnson, who's a guy I'm familiar with at Pro Wrestling Insider, wrote that it was a star-making performance. Looking back, we have to agree. Then they were back wrestling El Generico and Human Tornado for Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and this is when they started embracing being a heel, because Super Dragon, the booker, was like, no, you guys are baby faces. That was just a one-time thing that happened. It's fine. But no, the crowd is clearly booing them. So at one point, they did a sort of one of their routines. The crowd boos, and so Matt says, let's do it again. And so Nick does it again. So the crowd is like, oh, okay, they're being assholes back to us. And they're learning the most valuable wrestling lesson, which is to take what's real. Like, they really felt resentful towards the crowd, so now they're gonna let it come out. And then Super Dragon met us at the curtain. Okay, your heels, he said. Awesome. Great way to end the chapter. The next chapter is called Sign the Bucks by Matt, so you know that's going to be a good one, because I'm sure it's really when the Bucks started really catching on, and this is again when I was starting up PCW again. So I was really hip to the news of what was going on. So my favorite chapter to date, again, this book at this point continues to get better and better and better. We're getting towards the halfway point. I know for a lot of people doing this chapter by chapter thing might be frustrating, but again, a lot of people have sort of contacted me and said, I picked up the Bucks book and now I'm reading it along with you. I think that's cool. I think you should do that if you don't have the Bucks book already. Anyway, I'm going to see you guys tomorrow. I may or may not still be here in Clearwater. I may be back in Orlando, but we'll have to see. It's a gorgeous day. Wherever you are, I'm sure in its own way it's a gorgeous day, so go seize that bitch.